Hi, APES class. Today we are talking about human population distribution and urbanization. So, first things first, people like to settle near water. Freshwater ecosystems like rivers provide good things for agriculture. River valleys have very fertile soil typically. So it's very easy to grow a lot of crops, and also it's really easy to irrigate your crops because there's water right there. Rivers are also, and freshwater sources like lakes are really important for drinking water and sanitation. We use water to clean a lot of things. And then freshwater resources like rivers are really important for transportation. Saltwater cities or settlements near saltwater can be really important because saltwater, like oceans and seas, provides a lot of food resources like fish and also transportation. So the coastal land on Earth is the land within about 200 kilometers of the sea, and that's about 10% of Earth's land area. So just so that you have an idea of how big 200 kilometers is, the state of North Carolina is 900 kilometers long, and from the coast to Raleigh is just a little bit more than 200 kilometers. More than 50% of the global population lives within that 10% of Earth's land area. And that number is growing as we speak. So that has a lot of environmental consequences. So switching over to urbanization, there are four major trends that we need to understand to be able to analyze the issues around urban growth. So the first thing is that the proportion of global populations living in urban populations is increasing very quickly. Part of that's due to natural increases from births, but part of that's also due to immigration. So people come to the cities that are already overcrowded and short on resources because there are more economic opportunities in cities for education and jobs. About 50% of the world's people currently live in urban areas, and in the US, that's about 80%. So 80% of Americans live in cities. Number two trend is that the number and size of urban areas is increasing exponentially. So the book quoted that there's about 1 million people moving to cities every single week. Because, like we said, that there's more resources and more opportunities for them economically. There are about 18 cities worldwide that are considered megacities. These cities have over 200 people. Oh, sorry, over 10,000. There are about 18 megacities worldwide. Megacities or megalopolis have more than 10 million people. We have two here in the US, probably pretty easy to guess which ones, New York City and Los Angeles. Chicago is not quite there, but it's getting there. The third trend that we are talking about to understand issues of urban growth is that urban growth is faster in developing countries because we already have such a high number of people in developed countries who live in cities, and we also have the resources to travel between rural areas and cities very easily. The growth is not quite as fast as it is in developing countries where people are more in need of those economic opportunities that cities offer. And the fourth trend is that poverty is becoming urbanized. Slums and shanty towns are of very, very high populations and very poor living quality are growing in the outskirts of cities or within the cities themselves. So, those four trends being said, there are some advantages to living in cities. which is why so many people want to live there. Those advantages include that they are centers for economic development, education, technological advances, and jobs. They are also hubs for industry and commerce. People in cities tend to have longer lifespans, and there tends to be a lower infant mortality rate. People have a lot more access to resources in cities, whether that be like family planning resources, medical supplies and services, education. And so those advantages tend to be much more advantageous to wealthy people than they are to poor people living in cities, but there's still advantages nonetheless. And then there's a couple of environmental advantages. Number one, recycling is more economically feasible because there's that concentration of the recyclable materials, and there's the demand for the products of recycling. And cities actually preserve biodiversity and reduce stress on wildlife habitat because they are concentrated. So if a lot of people are living in this one single location, that prevents the need for all of the land that people might want to live out in the country to be deforested or the habitat destroyed to put houses on. And then lastly, cities can save a lot of energy if people are walking places, riding their bicycles, and using mass transit because things are closer in cities. So there are also some pretty big disadvantages to cities in urbanization. Cities are pretty unsustainable systems in general. They only occupy about 2% of the global land area. However, they use about 75% of the world's resources, and they produce about 75% of the world's carbon dioxide and other pollutants. Cities lack vegetation because they have buildings and pavement instead of vegetation. So this results in higher temperatures, higher water runoff in storms, and higher noise levels. Vegetation would normally cool areas down, absorb some of the water, buffer noise, and provide some wildlife habitat as well. Cities are notorious for water problems, mostly water supply problems and flooding. So because there are so many people in one place, it's really hard to have a constant supply of water, and that's going to be exaggerated by climate change in the coming years. The methods used to get enough water for cities can deprive and divert water from other rural areas or wildlife habitats. Flooding in cities, a lot of cities are built near rivers, so when they're right on the floodplain, if there's a big rain event, the river could rise and flood very easily. And then also impervious surfaces in cities are things like pavement and building rooftops. When the water hits those surfaces, it runs straight down them. It does not absorb like it would if it hits vegetated ground. And so that water runs quickly to the lowest point, and that is typically a point within the city, and so that point will flood. Storm drains get overwhelmed very quickly and results in a lot of flooding. And then coastal cities are going to experience some flooding due to sea level rise and higher frequency of storms. Cities tend to concentrate health and pollution problems. They produce most of the world's air and water pollution as well as hazardous waste. And so that also has an effect on the health problems. So like asthma rates are much higher in cities. And pollution, like air pollution and water pollution, can't disperse as quickly as it might in an undeveloped area because it's being produced in such high quantities and such high concentrations. And then we also have noise pollution from the constant running of everything in a city. So we have noise pollution from cars, from like furnaces running, from events, social events, and so that can cause a lot of hearing problems in people and unrest and stress. There's also problems with local climate. In cities tend to be warmer, rainier, foggier, and cloudier than the surrounding areas. And one of the things that we use to describe how cities are warmer is the urban heat island. So all of the heat that is generated by the cars and the factories and the furnaces and all that kind of stuff that's operating in a city and generating heat. And then you also have the heat that's absorbed by all of the paved surfaces. So that tends to increase the temperature in cities. And then there's also light pollution. That's a problem for wildlife that migrates or relies on natural lights, like birds and sea turtles. So, for class tomorrow, you should skim over sections 6.6 and 6.7.